Matisse is one of the most well-loved painters of the 20th century. Best known for his cutouts, childlike images cut directly into sheets of vibrant color. He wanted his art to transcend the darkness and the violence of the 20th century. And it's often seen him written off as superficial, a crowd pleaser, not really a serious artist. Today, the world has a very soft image of Matisse and his art. But underneath the creator of the cutouts was a real rebel, a revolutionary, a man who risked everything to tear up the rules of Western art. And at the beginning of his career, he was considered so shocking, he was ridiculed by everyone, by the critics, the public, even by many of his fellow artists.
Because he had such a long career, one forgets just how radical he was when he started out.
He was a man of ruthless purpose. You couldn't have painted like that if you were going to let anything stand in your way.
With the arrival of Matisse on the scene, you have a new pictorial language that is created that was absolutely inconceivable until then.
So who was this Matisse? And how did he become one of the most revolutionary artists of the 20th century? I think it's important to remind people of the rebel that he really was, that he had to be in order to do what he did. And also to bring the family back into the story. Matisse never would have been Matisse without his family. And that needs to be said.
My work and my drawings are pieces of myself. If my story were ever to be written down truthfully from start to finish, it would amaze everyone.
Everyone thinks of Matisse as a painter of color and light, but he actually came from the gray flatlands of northern France, near the Belgian border.
He was a man not only from the north, but from the most kind of northeastern, grayest, dismalest part of France in many ways.
It was a north that was in the absolute middle of the process of industrialization, changing a country that had been forested and rural to an industrial and urban world.
Where I come from, if there is a tree in the way, they root it out because it puts 4 sugar beets in the shade.
In some ways, so much of Matisse's art was really about escaping the world he was born into. But I don't think anyone can escape their childhood.
Beaune, where Matisse grew up, was the Manchester of France.
It was a big manufacturing area at the time he was growing up, especially textiles. But it wasn't a place that you thought of artists coming from. If you're in La Beaune and your son wants to be an artist, I think it's the last thing that you want him to do.
Les parents de Matisse sont les premiers à sortir de cette dimension du textile pour essayer d'aller ouvrir leur propre commerce. Le magasin qu'ils vont ouvrir, ça va être une grainerie et ils vont petit à petit prospérer comme ça pour devenir des commerçants assez importants.
So if you picture the house that Matisse grew up in, on the ground floor, Matisse's mom had the shop. She sold paints, birdseed. She sold basically anything that one might need for the house. In the back, Matisse's dad had his grain business. Even though they were still at school, Matisse and his younger brother were told to carry sacks of grain, clean up shop at the end of the day. It was really a group effort to run the business.
I think his father would have liked his son to take over the business. This was not something that interested Matisse at all. And as a child, he was frequently ill. He had some sort of an intestinal or stomach problem, which very likely was psychosomatic. I think, in a way, the reason his stomach ached was because he couldn't stomach the life that he had been destined for.
His father realized that his son would never be able to hump the sacks of grain, so he said, well, we'll have to make something useful out of the boy anyway, and sent him to a lawyer's office to become a lawyer, which of course drove Matisse wild with misery once all over again. Misery, boredom, and repressed rebellion.
In the office, the boss would ask, Monsieur Matisse, where did we get with that business? He got used to hearing no answer from me and would go look up the files himself. I was an ordnance orderly who fell asleep on the job.
I think at this time, he felt very trapped in the life that he had. He talked about the things that really captivated him as a child. His mom mixing colors in the shop, the textiles that were sold on the sidewalk. But I think the thing that really made him dream the most were the birds the family kept in the backyard. This room is literally just above where the family kept their birds. They had a little dovecote down there. So I can imagine that, Matisse as a little boy come in this room. And in a way, these birds represented freedom. Then he was ready to leave.
As often as not, the starting point is just an accident. I had appendicitis. I had time on my hands, and I had to fill it. That's when the paint box turned up. I was 21.
In the end, Matisse collapsed. He went to bed and eventually was sent to hospital, and no one could diagnose what was wrong with him. His mother, tremendously appalled at seeing her son in this state, gave him a paint box. She thought it would distract him, perhaps, give him something to do as he lay in bed all the time. So that was how Matisse held a paintbrush for the first time and started to paint.
This was Matisse's little paint box. And it had some little broken corner somewhere. And my grandmother gave it to me to fix. You can open this up, you can put your little paintings here, but it also comes with chromos and little paintings that you can copy from, essentially. Can you imagine just receiving this box, opening it and seeing the colors? And he knew right then and there that that was it.
Like a cow given sight of the grass, I just dived right in. Here was a sort of paradise regained, where I was completely free, alone, and at peace.
His first paint box did come from his mom. And I do think it was actually very meaningful because she probably knew very clearly that he wasn't really finding his way too easily and depressed, and mothers, they tend to pick up on those kind of things. She did open the first window. I mean, she presented the first window and he opened it. So that's beautiful.
When I said I wanted to be a painter, it was like telling my father, what you did was no use and never will be. Let him do 1 year, my mother said, and she made his life such a misery he gave him.
After the gift of the paint box from his mother, he decided he wanted to be an artist, and he would go to Paris, the capital of art in the world at that time. His father was not particularly happy. For one thing, it was not a respectable thing to do, particularly to be an artist, live a bohemian life. How was this guy going to live? Did artists make any money? And it said that when he took him to the train station, he shook his fist at him and said, "You'll starve."
His main goal was to get accepted into the École des Beaux-Arts. The Beaux-Arts was like one of the best schools in France, if not in Europe, to become a successful artist.
The Académie des Beaux-Arts, which means in English the Academy of Fine Arts, was pretty much the equivalent of the Royal Academy in London. And its mission was to produce the same kind of artists as they had been producing for 3 centuries. You need to remember Phidias, the great sculptor of 5th century before Christ in Greece. You need to remember Raphael. You need to remember Ingres. So in order to get some kind of recognition, you just had to go through this machine that was producing through one mold, one academic artist after another.
I went to the Beaux-Arts myself. It wasn't exactly the same thing it was for Matisse in his time, but I did go, and it's pretty heavy, the expectations. When Matisse came here, he was desperate to get in because the pressure from his parents might hopefully lift a little bit. And he really wanted to prove himself. He was desperate to catch up because he had just literally begun being an artist. And he always felt very far behind everybody else, when in fact he went much further than everybody eventually, of course.
In order to get into the École des Beaux-Arts, one had to pass a competition. And in order to do that, one usually went to a feeder school. There, Matisse worked with Bouguereau, who was probably the most famous and highly regarded academician at the time. He stood for the values of the Beaux-Arts, for kind of photographic rendering, sentimental painting. Matisse was apparently not terribly well liked by either the teachers or the other students. In the register of his class, the word sournois is written down next to his name, which means that it's something between sneaky and not quite reputable. I think that he seemed sournois because of his detachment from the program. I believe that even at that early stage, he knew that Bouguereau was the opposite of what he wanted to do. The problem for Matisse was that he failed the examination.
Ce dessin exécuté pour le concours d'entrée à l'École des Beaux-Arts à Paris a été l'objet d'un refus. Henri Matisse, 1952. C'est fou, ça. Why do you think he didn't get into the Beaux-Arts?
Pour s'amuser un peu. Là-bas, c'est un moustachu. Et ici, c'est l'idole. Il y a quelque chose d'hésitant. Il fait une grosse tête.
Yeah,
et quand on fait une grosse tête, on a un corps, évidemment, qui est petit. Et il oublie de faire le pied de gauche. Ça n'a pas du tout d'élégance. Il n'a pas trouvé encore de solution de simplicité.
C'est ça.
Les 2 dessins d'après l'Antique, eux, préfigurent l'œuvre à venir, les papiers découpés.
Oui, c'est ça.
Mais pas le moustachu.
Despite failing the examination, this didn't stop Matisse finding another way to get into the Beaux-Arts.
People said, there's a new teacher, Gustave Moreau. He's very nice. When he comes through the glazed court, say hello. He said, come and work in my studio. But I haven't been admitted to the école. Doesn't matter.
Moreau was kind of a rebel, relatively speaking, at the school. Moreau really liked Matisse. He also saw something in Matisse that went beyond simply a sympathetic personality.
One of the things he did is take them to the Louvre
And then once at the Louvre, they were making copy, with quite classic way of learning. And you get familiar with Delacroix, with Poussin. What he made them do is you do a copy, but don't copy for copying. You have to express yourself in this copy.
He didn't show us how to paint. He aroused our imagination in front of the life he found in those paintings.
He also encourages his students to make life drawings in the street. Try to capture the life in the drawing, so to be very free in the line. So this was another method of drawing. So Moreau gave them the taste of liberty, not following the academic course.
It was around this time that Matisse got his first studio, Quai Saint-Michel. He was on the very top floor, and I think for the rest of his life, he even remembered it was 102 steps to get up to his place. Oh, here we see this place was full of artists. Behind every door, there was a studio. Must have smelled good. Oil, yummy.
For 350 francs a year, I had a room on the 6th floor. Fine view, Notre Dame to the right, Louvre to the left. On Sundays, there was always a great throng on the quay.
One of the stories that I loved was when Matisse came here, he had a pea shooter, and he would load it up and fire it down with the little pellets and try to get the fishermen or the ladies passing by. And you could see how far he could go without getting caught. You see people looking around. It must have been very funny. He did get caught, though, once. This place was very important to Matisse personally because not only was it his first studio in Paris, but he met a girl here, became his girlfriend, Camille. Camille worked in a hat shop. She was a model for Matisse, and they hooked up, and she was living with him here in the back room, somewhere over there. And she got pregnant here. She was young. I mean, when she got pregnant, she was only 19 years old. So this was pretty devastating, as having a child out of wedlock was not really a great idea at that time. It was pretty taboo, in fact. But that's when Marguerite was born. This is a portrait of Marguerite when she was little. And I think it was a portrait done by Evan Poe, who was a very close friend and who also painted in this building as well. That's beautiful. Marguerite is the little one. This must have been somewhat horrifying for his parents. But they still give him a chance because he's painting well at school. The French state has even bought one of his paintings of Camille. But even at school, he started to feel trapped by all the rules.
Between 1895 and 1897, Moreau opens Matisse's eyes up to the possibilities of painting. And then he meets Pissarro. And Pissarro opens his eyes to Impressionism. At the time that Matisse was a student, Impressionism and the École des Beaux-Arts were in two different worlds. The color is brighter, and the sense of light becomes an important part of the subject matter of the painting. So for an artist to be an Impressionist was to be, to some degree, a bad boy.
This Impressionist revolution opened doors that artists had never known could be opened beforehand. Cézanne, Pissarro, Degas, with a kind of very anti-salon, anti-academy, established a parallel system by which it became possible to pursue their own career separately. So you can refuse the academy, Pissarro tells him, and you can eventually hope to make it, to become yourself.
These things cumulatively had a huge impact on Matisse. At the end of his course at the Beaux-Arts, any student was expected to produce a presentation painting. But when the time came to put it down on canvas to show he was a proper artist, he'd seen a new way of painting water and colour and light, and he couldn't help but incorporate it in this painting. He took it to the salon, he hung it up, wasn't well hung, and was absolutely horrified, appalled, crestfallen, when people began collecting in front of it and saying, "Look at this rubbish, what's this doing in the show?" When his parents came up from Beaune, proud of their son's success, to see his first painting in the salon, people said there were microbes at the bottom of the glasses, that the whole thing was toxic. So, you know, it was a scandal. Camille posed for the serving girl in the dinner table. Camille was horrified, and so were Matisse's friends. She was pleading not just for herself and for their child, but also for him and his future, his career as an artist. And she was quite right. He was throwing his career away with that painting. But Matisse's brush had a will of its own. It would paint that way, and he couldn't change it.
Later in life, I know that he was pretty proud of his choices of that time, but it couldn't have been easy. He turned his back on the academy. He painted the way he chose to paint. Even Camille left him for that, and she left him with Marguerite, with the child. Now he's on his own. This is Amélie at a very young age, just at the time that she was meeting this fine young chap, the kind of guy she promised herself never to go out with. And here's the guy with red hair, the young, unpromising artist. He was invited to a marriage, and he was seated next to this woman, Amélie Pereire. And as the story goes, there was dancing, and when they all got up from the table to dance, she held out her hand the way that she did it, or signaled to him that this might be something that would continue. She made a vow to herself that she just wouldn't ever be with an artist, be a guy with red hair or a beard. But there was chemistry immediately. So she definitely broke a vow. Yeah. The parents of Amélie, Armand and Catherine, I love this picture. This is Armand. They were a very connected couple. And they were very open to accepting Matisse, an artist who hadn't quite made it and shows no promise and has an illegitimate daughter. Those, might not seem anything today by today's standards, but back in the day, that was kind of a big deal.
Amélie's parents worked for a couple called Humbert. Monsieur Humbert was the son of the former Minister of Justice, who had been one of the founders of the current French Republic, hugely powerful man. And his wife, Thérèse, was an even more extraordinary person. She and her husband were one of the wealthiest and most powerful couples in Paris at the time. So Matisse is now marrying into some of the wealthiest circles in Paris. They were married, I think, something like 6 weeks after the day they first met, and Matisse wrote in his diary, "Vive la liberté, long live liberty."
I never felt magic crazy as this.
That's how they began.
I never saw moons, knew the meaning of the sea.
Here he looks excited about the future. I mean, I would be too. He's just come into a new universe, and he can breathe. It seems like he just can't resist
But now you're here,
smiling.
bright in my northern sky.
In Ajaccio, we found an entire floor of a villa to rent for 40 francs a month. It's 100 meters from the sea. Every room faces south.
It's been a long time that I'm waiting. It's been a long time that I'm blown.
For their honeymoon, they went to Corsica. And then in Corsica, he discovered light, something that he never saw. And it's not only light, it's also nature, different kind of trees, different kind of sounds too.
I am in a wondrous country, the blue, blue sea. So blue you could eat it. Dark green orange trees with fruit like set jewels, and big eucalyptus trees with foliage bloom like cockerel feathers.
And for that guy coming from the north, he changes dramatically his way of seeing. And then he started to paint differently.
Their honeymoon was, for him, an absolute riot, an orgy of painting, and no doubt other things. The paintings, they're absolutely revelatory. He himself is immersed in light and colour. And of course it's the light and colour of a man on his honeymoon, a wild honeymoon, and one of his paintings is of the double bed, you know.
Some of the paintings that he paints in Corsica are the first paintings he ever paints that are painted in a state of ecstasy, where the goal is to convey a state of ecstasy.
It's crazy. He had such a charming quality as a painter.
He sent his picture from Corsica to Paris to one of his friends from the École des Beaux-Arts, Henri Evan Powell. And for him, it was a crazy picture. He said it was epileptic impressionism. He didn't understand at all what happened to Matisse there in Corsica. After that episode, he didn't want to talk again to Matisse. Matisse renounced in a way to this friendship, painting like that, you know? If you paint like that, then socially you renounce things.
The thing about Amélie, her support at that point had to be crucial, absolutely crucial. She doesn't really seem to have had much of a background in art at all. But when he painted those paintings, wondering whether he was maybe going crazy, if he's painting paintings like this, maybe what he was doing was committing a kind of financial suicide, Amélie was supportive. She said, that's what you want to paint. That's what you should paint.
When they got back from their honeymoon in the south, a new period is starting, and it's going to be hard. Amélie's first son was born just very recently. This is the first child, is Jean. And Amélie adopted Marguerite. She took her under her wing. And then they had another son, Pierre. So that makes 3 children at home, and Matisse's paintings were, no one bought them. So Amélie decided to open a shop to make some income. And so she opened that little millinery shop. She worked hard, working during the day, cooking, teaching to the children, creating.
Amélie was set up in her hat shop in one of the smartest streets in Paris by Madame Humbert, who was her mother's employer. But the Matisse's brief period of prosperity ended quite abruptly when Thérèse Humbert was revealed as one of the great con queens of the world. Her mighty fortune was based on a will. She was due to inherit 100 million francs. She kept the will in her safe, and it was on the strength of that will that thousands of people all over France lent her money. But when the strongbox was finally opened, it turned out to contain an old newspaper, a trouser button, and a worthless coin. That was all that was in it. It was an international scandal. There were headlines in New York, in London, as well as in Paris. Banks went bust all over the country. Bankers committed suicide. Businesses failed. It was just horrific. The scandal affected his family, all of them, enormously.
It's just incredible. It's all here as if it's like happening right now. Amelie's father gets caught and arrested and put into prison. And you have a picture here showing how he's being taken to prison.
Amelie's father was arrested because the Humberts had fled. They could not be found. Amelie's parents carried the can. They were left as scapegoats.
This is Christmas of 1902. And Mr. Perret, Amelie's dad, goes on a hunger strike. And to proclaim his innocence, Matisse is trying to get the best lawyer in Paris to come and defend him. But even that guy doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Friday, the 26th of December, 1902. Here it has Perret à manger. Finally, Mr. Perret has eaten. His hunger strike is over. Perret is now not going to be interrogated anymore because Matisse has taken this into his hands. Even if it means playing the lawyer, a role that he never really appreciated before, Matisse was able to defend his new father-in-law. I didn't know about this story growing up. It was not talked about for years. I think in some ways it made the family retreat. Even today, it's not a family that's super duper communicative with the outside world. And I think, you know, the roots to that might very well come from this dark, dark, dark period. I think the impact of the scandal on them personally was completely devastating. They lost the hat shop, and they lost their place where they lived. So there was no other way of moving forward other than going back up north and living with Matisse's parents. With 3 kids, I mean, you can imagine the awkwardness. So he ends up renting a place around the corner.
Being back in Bois, it must have felt a failure. There was a lot of gossips about what happened with the Humbert affair. He couldn't sleep for a while. It was a terrible period for him. Really, maybe depression, somehow. Very dark period.
My father told me a few days ago, very angry and humiliated, that everyone took me for an imbécile. The worst of it is that he held me responsible.
Quand il revient à Boin, personne ne croit plus en lui, même pas dans sa famille. On dit que c'est le triple échec. Le premier, il n'a pas été capable de reprendre le magasin de son père. Le deuxième, il a abandonné sa carrière de clerc d'avoué. Et le troisième, c'est sur la peinture, puisqu'il ne vend rien, donc c'est même pas un bon peintre.
In order to paint, one must be unable to do anything else. A few years ago, I managed to create things that people liked and which I did from pure instinct. If only this facility would come back to me, I'd be able to start again.
En 1903, il doit faire de la peinture qui se vend parce qu'il doit nourrir sa famille. Donc il a laissé derrière lui tout ce que lui avait apporté la découverte du soleil, le jeu des couleurs. On n'est pas dans une facture académique, donc il n'a pas totalement renoncé. Il s'accroche encore à sa volonté d'être un peintre moderne. Mais ce n'est pas le type de paysage qui va être acheté par les habitants du cru, parce que pour eux, eh bien, c'est du travail de barbouilleur, comme on l'appelait.
This is the house that Matisse rented from his dad when they came here after the whole Humbert affair. And this is where he made a very magical painting on the top floor that I think really reveals his state of mind at the time. This is certainly the room. It feels really like the painting. I don't think anything has changed. I love this painting because it was, when I saw it as a small child, that was sort of my fantasy of just having a space to be left alone and just to paint. And I think maybe in some ways that he may have had a similar feeling. I want to get away from the people outside and everybody criticizing him for his work. It's interesting how in that painting you do get that sense of space being elongated. The window is a bit further out. Perhaps a reminder of he's a little further away from his dream. 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward. Anyway, you could hear the birds from here.
In 1903, Thérèse was finally brought to trial, and after Madame Humbert's indictment, the Matisses returned to Paris and tried to pick up their old life as it had been before. Matisse was still hoping to earn a living by selling conventional still lifes and landscapes. He found a buyer, but on the day that the buyer was coming, he realized that he just couldn't sell this stuff, that it wasn't him. So Matisse's wife and daughter set themselves to scrub the canvases clean. Marguerite, as a child, remembered her arms aching because it's hard work to scrub oil paint off a canvas. She never forgot it.
Looking back, I realize it required much courage, especially as the hands of the baker and the butcher were waiting for money. I count my emancipation from that day.
The story of Marguerite scrubbing the paintings really shows that it wasn't just Amélie who was sucked into Matisse's efforts in the studio. It was the kids too. I think they actually helped him find a way out of this dark period of his life. I like this picture because here we have Amélie and Matisse, and we have Pierre, who was my grandfather. Here he's laughing. The tie that he had with his kids became solidified even more so after he had a couple of close calls of, them being very sick.
Each one of them nearly died. Jean, when he was 5 months old, had enteritis. He survived, of course, but it was touch and go. And then Pierre had pneumonia and very nearly died of that. Marguerite, as a very small child, had to have a tracheotomy. Absolutely appalling. Matisse ran out in the street for a doctor. She could not breathe, and it was desperate. He held her down on the kitchen table and slit her throat because she would have died otherwise. It was the most appalling thing to have to do to a child that you love.
This portrait was done within the year after she was very sick and he almost lost her. There's a lot of vulnerability in this painting. I mean, she's just holding on to life. Same for this one that was done after Pierre had a very close call as well. And so his response was to paint them. And it was by painting them, I think, that he understood how to be a modern painter again. It's just so Pierre. I mean, just the foot going in is super childlike. He almost went out of the picture, but he's in there.
I think that Matisse's children almost certainly played a really important role as an impetus toward originality. In 1904, Pierre was 4 years old, and that's the age in which kids love to draw, and they do the most original sort of drawings. Matisse, by having those children, I think, had a source of inspiration around him for really breaking the rules, because for kids there are no rules.
They gave him a fresh look, and that's what he's wanting. That's what he's hungry for, and that's what he's been searching for, and that's what he gave up everything he learned for, was this. So that sends him on his way. In 1904, 6 years since he and Amélie had been to Corsica, Matisse was desperate to go back to the sunlight of the South. He was now 34, and I think he wanted to prove to everyone he could be a modern painter.
In 1904, Matisse was invited by the neo-impressionist leader, and by that time Paul Signac, to spend the summer and paint in Saint-Tropez. He had a very nice home there in Paul Signac, and invited Matisse and his family. So he went to the south by train, taking all these canvases and work. And then he worked with the Signac style, lots of colors, pure colors.
I went to Saint-Tropez for a season. That's where I encountered the palette of the neo-impressionists, which is based on optical mixing, complementaries, and the luminosity of colors. That's where I did the painting Luxe, Calme et Volupté.
I think he felt that he wanted to go in that direction because he wanted to get inside what he felt was the basic structure of modern painting. I don't think he had any idea where it was going to take him. But what he does in the summer of 1904 is a combination of neo-impressionism and not neo-impressionism.
Matisse must have been asking himself, where am I going next? What is my role here? How am I going to take that lesson, the neo-impressionist lesson, and move it to the next level? And so, sure, he tries his luck with neo-impressionism. And he proves that he is completely able to do that. But I think Matisse must have felt immediately that this was too stifling a system for him. I think that Matisse fed off freedom. He needed that flow of free vibes in order to pursue his program as a painter.
Neo-impressionist theory is very convenient, but in terms of the artist's creation, it's completely inadequate. One has to go off into the jungle to find simpler ways which won't stifle the spirit.
The following summer, he decided he wanted to go south again, but he doesn't want to go to Saint-Tropez because that's Signac's town. He decides that he wants to go to some place that's a bit off the beaten track, and he chooses Collioure.
Collioure is a stony little resort on the Mediterranean, a few miles inland from the Spanish border. But in those days, no tourist in their right mind would have dreamed of going there. It was a fishing village. It was heavily, heavily plagued by mosquitoes every summer. And it was very, very cheap.
When Matisse and Amélie finally do get to Collioure, I think when he saw how isolated they were from the outside world, he had an innate sense that this is where he could actually get something done. The light is sensational.
That summer of 1905, Matisse took greater risks than even he had ever taken before. And what was appearing on his canvases so disturbed him, was so unlike anything anyone had ever painted before, that he begged various friends to come. He wanted support. Nobody would come. I mean, it was a dump, you know, it was an expensive train ticket. They were all very poor. So nobody came, except for a much younger colleague called André Derain. And because Matisse was painting some very wild things, he painted some pretty wild canvases too that summer.
Ils sont restés quoi, pas si longtemps que ça ensemble ici.
Non,
cet été.
Ils ont travaillé à peine 2 mois.
Et tout le travail, ils ont fait énormément de travail en ce moment-là. Et juste ici.
Juste là, nous sommes en plein cœur.
Ah oui, exact.
On peut imaginer, on peut les imaginer
voilà,
tous les deux ayant posé leur chevalet.
Avec les bateaux.
Matisse, avec l'expérience déjà passée qu'il avait eue, et Derain qui était plus neuf,
ça,
et qui justement pouvait apporter la fougue et l'inhibition.
Oui,
aussi.
c'est exactement.
Et ça pouvait plaire à Matisse de se dire, oui, et il m'aide à foncer.
The fact that André Derain joined him in Collioure was important. They were not in competition, they are working together. And they were consciously doing something new and trying to break rules, obviously. What does that mean? That means that they were painting with pure colors, than colors that were not imitating nature or what they were seeing. Color that were expressing themselves. It's a moment of break. It's a kind of revolution in painting.
We were at that point like children before nature. And we let our temperament speak. I spoiled everything on principle and worked as I felt, only by color.
You must realize that there was really, at that time, between the two, a lot of stress, and they were very anxious.
I believe that there are certain moments in the life of an artist where you know that you're taking vast, vast risks. Matisse knew first and foremost that he was breaking ranks with not 1 or 2 generations with Signac and Pissarro, Cézanne. He was breaking with 500-year tradition that had started with the Renaissance, that was suddenly done away with a few gushing of paint from the tube on the canvas. So Matisse was totally aware of the radicality of that gesture.
Qu'est-ce que c'est sauvage, hein?
This summer of 1905 in Collioure, Amélée's support was absolutely key. They'd gone through so much together by this time. He, after all, had supported her family in time of extreme need. And now she supported him in every conceivable way. And Amélie modelled for many of the key canvases that Matisse made that summer.
Ils ont dû s'installer là.
Pour peindre là, c'est le fameux rocher qui a été peint, sur lequel il y avait Amélie. Derain dessine Matisse lui-même en train de peindre sa femme.
Oui.
Habillée en kimono sur le rocher.
When I first saw that painting, it took me a little time to find her. She seemed to be sort of camouflaged into the nature. She became the rocks, or the rocks became her. And learning about the story, you find out how much she was a rock-solid force for Matisse and Derain to support them when they were going through this. It was just, I think, a very pivotal moment, and it just happened right here. It's just very...
Émotionnel.
Merci, sorry. Oh, look, the dice are always rolling. Ça tourne tout le temps. Juste au moment qu'on pense que tout peut s'écrouler, on ne sait jamais ce qui arrive le lendemain.
Oui.
Et regardez ce qui est arrivé le lendemain pour eux.
C'était quand même le succès.
C'était le succès, mais ils ont pris un risque quand même.
Bien sûr.
Ils ont eu le courage pour le faire. Et grâce à Amélie, elle était là.
Vive les femmes, les artistes.
Exactement. Exactement. Mais il faut le dire.
All my life, I have felt hunted down because I didn't paint like anyone else.
So Matisse comes back from Collioure at the end of the summer with a lot of paintings. And he's going to show them in the Salon d'Automne, which is an avant-garde salon, which is only a few years old.
These, I'd like to say, were the original paintings, but obviously they're not. They're somewhere else. And these two, plus the one of Amélie in the Japanese kimono, are the three paintings that he chose to put in the Salon in 1905. And I think he felt it was kind of a make or break.
What strikes me is the choice that he made for the Salon. Because while in Collioure in 1905, he went back. He was preparing a large picture in neo-impressionist style. He worked hard on this picture and suddenly decided to get rid of that, and he painted something new, something else. And what was it? It was a portrait of Amélie. And the portrait of Amélie was the woman with the hat. We go for it, but we go for it together.
Here you have this portrait of Amélie. She has her fan, her hat, and she's made up of these unimaginable colors. Hat shops at that time were different from today. I mean, you go into the hat shop, you buy the hat that is good, and then you buy everything that goes on, all the accessories and the colors. And he's really kind of painting not only her from his emotional state, but also everything that she has brought to him through the colors. So this is so much more than a portrait.
When he showed the woman in a hat at the autumn salon, it was like a circus act, a freak act. They'd done that before for Matisse paintings, of course, but never anything quite as monstrous as this.
The public thought Matisse was crazy. It is said that people tried to attack the painting. The woman with the hat is a real provocation. It was painted as a provocation, and it worked. And he knew it because it's a portrait. Portrait, in a way, is one of the staidest genres of painting there is, because the first thing about a portrait, it has to look like the person. It does look like her, but it does look like her in a completely non-normative way. There are all kinds of smears of paint on her face, and as a result of that salon, Those artists, Matisse in particular, came to be known as the fauves, wild beasts, is, I think, very telling. They were seen, they were no longer civilized men. They were wild beasts. They were savages.
The general public, of course, rejected them. You might well have expected that. The art world, too, the art establishment, dealers, no question, art critics. But the worst of all was his fellow artists. What his fellow artists did in Montmartre was alter a whole lot of posters that had been set up outside urinals warning about the toxic qualities of lead paint. This was a government campaign and they were determined to stop people using the stuff. And worst of all, really, there were posters all over the walls saying, "Matisse drives you mad." Well, you can imagine his feelings.
I mean, the woman with the hat, in a way, became the magnet for all the negative feeling. I think it's important to remember, in 1905, Picasso was painting pink period paintings, which are very kind of soft and lyrical. And I think that a painting like that would have really made him think, what the hell is that about? And in fact, some of Matisse's fellow artists apparently sent a woman to the gallery with green paint all over her face. So what he does is he paints another portrait of his wife with a green stripe down her face. He basically says, go to hell, I don't care what you think.
This is a portrait of Amélie, the famous portrait with the green stripe that I think he used as a real statement piece to say, you ain't seen nothing yet. And this piece is a self-portrait from '06 as well, just after the Salon. And it's the defiant piece. I mean, this is a very tough portrait. It's rough, it's a little bit dirty. He's almost showing us the real raw Matisse. He has battle scars, and you can see he has been through one hell of a ride, and he's not stopping now. And he's got his little lip, it almost looks like it's out, like, fuck you. Yeah, it is like a fuck you. I love it. The more people give him shit for what he does, the more he's gonna be himself and throw it right back at people and make them masterpieces at the same time.
I think what comes out of Matisse and Collioure is one of the strongest moments in the history of Western painting. It's a moment where you see Matisse becoming Matisse. But at the same time, I think that once he's done this, he has to step back and do something else. He's going to continuously reinvent himself, never satisfying himself with any kind of easy solution. The paintings in 1917, the greatest paintings in the Nice period, the cutouts. I mean, the cutout is another way of inventing a new language, as radical, as innovative as the Fauve period in 1905. And the guy is 50 years older.
I think if you were just to see this painting of Matisse's self-portrait, it's so prominent and it's so strong. You might think that, you know, he changed the world on his own in a way. He changed the way we look at art. But he needed the strength and the support of Amélie, his wife. And in a way, they did it together. He could not have done it without her.
I never felt magic crazy as this.
The
Being in lockdown doesn't mean you can't still enjoy a look around some fascinating exhibitions. Museums in Quarantine, Monday at 7:30 on BBC4. And right now on BBC iPlayer, a showcase of some of the most exciting artists working in performance today. Streaming now.
You're here, bright in my northern sky.